Welcome to a Trekzone conversation where we dive into science fiction. Today, Emmett Plant is here. He's a writer, composer, sound designer, and producer with over 20 Star Trek audiobooks to his credit. Emmett Plant, thanks for taking some time to have a Trekzone conversation.
I am very happy to be here in the Trekzone.
Now, these audiobooks that you've produced, so many of them, were you a fan of Trek before joining its working ranks?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, you have to understand, I was into Star Trek when I was a very, very little kid. I've always been a Trekkie ever since I saw the reruns on Channel 11 way too late at night, but no one ever told me to go to bed. So, yeah, I've been a Trekkie forever. It was funny. I got to I presented at a conference called a convention called Shore Leave. They're one of the oldest Star Trek conventions in the U.S. It was funny because I was there as a guest because I was talking about Star Trek audiobooks and doing sound design and soundtrack composition and all that stuff. But I said, hey, you know those annoying teenagers that run around the con? Be nice to them. One day they'll be a guest. Because I was the annoying teenager running around the con at like 16 years old.
It is incredible. What's your biggest highlight in working on Trek?
I know that I'm supposed to say like a given product, but it's really the fact that the fandom for Star Trek is really just unbelievably kind and thoughtful and caring, and they take care of each other, and they are uniformly awesome people. There are some people that are crazy on the internet, but that's what the internet's for, right? The greatest experience for me has been the opportunities to meet so many of the fans and speak to so many of them and, argue about lore and canon forever. It's been great. Like every time I've done so many Klingon projects that every time I'm at a convention, there's always Klingons wanting to do shots, and they want to do shots like at my table at the convention. And I'm like, guys, this really isn't cool. But then they're like, okay, but let's do shots. And I'm like, you guys know I don't drink, right? Like, yeah, we know. I'm like, okay. And then I do shots with them because why not, right? I've met some of the best people I know in the world through Star Trek fandom. So that's probably the biggest positive thing.
And that's one thing that I have to remember. A lot of people have to remember that dive into the minutiae of the internet and the Facebook groups and all these people that want to have something wrong. And it's not just Star Trek as well. It seems that every fandom that is, or every franchise that has been around for long enough has this subset of the fandom that can't find anything to enjoy. They have to pick apart everything and really just hate on everything for whatever reason, aside from, I guess, making themselves feel good.
I think there's a generational problem there. I think that, like, trust me, you will find intense fandoms, like even for things like General Hospital or Knots Landing, which are like soap operas in the United States. I know for a fact, I have a friend on the cast of EastEnders, and those people are similarly nuts, and they've got, those fans have got opinions on the real, but they just do. But the thing is, it's funny to me because they talk about the characters like they're real people who live in a real place, and they don't. It's a set. It's a very big set, but like they're not real. Like how I came up in like science fiction or anything I was a fan of was that you would find something cool and then you would tell your friends like, hey, this thing is really cool and I found it. I want to show you this thing that's cool. And then like the 90s happened and, sarcasm and irony became very popular. It was cool not to be cool or interesting or, more importantly, interested. So it was a situation where like people just want to tear stuff down. And my point of view has always been, look, if you love something, I want to know about it. If you don't like something, I don't care. It's not important to me. I don't care about what you hate.
But why don't you share in my hatred?
Well, the other thing is too, like, there's a very, very warped perspective of like how Star Trek is made on the internet. I can't, like, as a writer myself, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from fans on the internet talking about the new shows and like, yeah, we hate the writing. And I'm like, okay, have you read the script? It's like, no, but the writing sucks. I'm like, how could you possibly know unless you've read it? You can't. The other thing that drives me crazy is they also seem to think that people who work on Star Trek are created in a vat, and they are born to work on Star Trek, and we never had any lives before or after we worked on Star Trek. You know, our DNA swapped around to make us understand how warp power works from a very young age. It's like the Matrix. It's like, you know, I know how impulse engines work, but like they don't understand that everybody who's writing Star Trek, everybody who's working on Star Trek has had a career before Star Trek. And if people really don't like Star Trek and they think that there are writing problems, there is absolutely nothing stopping them from writing something better and getting it to an agent and then selling that script to Star Trek. Like, that's how it works. That's how it actually operates. Like, yes, there's a writer's room, but if they have a great script, they're going to use it. Why wouldn't they? That's ridiculous. My thoughts are like, if you really feel this strongly about Star Trek and how it isn't what you want, please, by all means, write some new episodes. I tell people at conventions all the time, I say, you know why TV is so boring and why you're watching like Vines on YouTube? It's because like there is nothing on television that's funnier than you and your friends just, you know, playing a video game or just, you know, hanging out on Discord. There's nothing funnier than that. Like even on shows that they pay millions of dollars for comedies at least, like you and your friends are funnier than The Big Bang Theory. That's just the way it is. There's nothing better. So you and your friends should really be writing this stuff. You don't have to have like a master's degree to write a sitcom. You don't have to like people they're like the creator credit, right? They're like, I want to create a show where it's like, no, that's not what you do. What you do is write a pilot. That's how a show gets a creator. You write a pilot, you sell a pilot, you make a pilot. The person who wrote that pilot gets that creator credit. That's the way it works. Sit down, write your stuff out. There's a million books to help you get there. There's a billion people online who want to help you write better screenplays. Just get involved and do it. Like people see me, they're like, oh, it's the Star Trek guy. You know, he does, you know, kinds of stuff on Star Trek. It's like, okay, yeah. But you didn't see like the years I spent writing and producing commercials for terrible, shifty basement waterproofing companies. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of stuff that led up to getting the opportunity to work on Track Stop.
Absolutely.
But I advise anybody who is driven and can do the work and are kind to other people to please get into the industry. And we need you. We need you now. We need to get rid of the jerk-offs. Like, just come to the industry as soon as you can. Thank you.
Well, now, while your work is worthy of a podcast all of its own, Emmett, the main reason for bringing you on the show today is some solicitation you received a few weeks back from an infamous self-titled producer. Can you give us a brief overview of how this all got started?
You know, we can get into that producer title pretty easily. But the funniest thing is, like, as a producer, people don't really understand what that job is. But one of the main jobs is balancing a budget, like getting a budget and then using that budget to make whatever you're making. And then you get it done on time and under budget. You're a great producer. That's the only reason why I keep being hired for stuff, is because people want to make stuff. And then I bring in projects on time and under budget. That's a producer's job. Now, if you raise $1.7 million and you have very little content to show for it, I don't think I would consider that a great producer. I would consider that something else. Anyway, somebody who very much meets this description is a guy by the name of Alec Peters, and he wrote to me because there's a voice actor named Vic Mignogna who is irrelevant, but Alec doesn't like him. And there's a notion that I got Vic removed from the Star Trek convention in Las Vegas. I definitely had a part in that, but, you know, I wasn't the driving factor. I don't have that kind of juice. Do you know what I mean? I can't just like call creation and say like, I don't appreciate this person being at your convention. Remove them at once. You know, like that's not the way the world works. But Yeah. So Alec wrote to me, and he's like, "Hey, good job, doing this stuff." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "What do you do on Star Trek?" And I'm thinking like, he's like, "I'm the guy from Axanar." I'm like, "I know who you are." And he asks me what I do on Star Trek, and I'm like, "Wow, you wanted to start this conversation with me, not having any idea what I do? Like that's strange." And then he started pitching me on producing the audio version of the Axanar movie or something. It was unclear, but I'm like, that's impossible. Like, no, I can't do that, and I wouldn't even if I could. I didn't tell him that part, but that's true. That's a true story. It was very, very weird and very uncomfortable, and I told him I was uncomfortable numerous times throughout the conversation. It just didn't stop, and it was super weird. And then eventually, and here's the other thing, and this is the weird part. When I got the first message from him, I wrote out a tweet, and I said, "Oh God, where have I gone so wrong in life that I've got a message from Alec Peters, a private message from Alec Peters? Like, what have I done?" It's like the song Galileo by Indigo Girls. Like, what did I do in a past life that made me suffer this? After I posted that, and like halfway through my conversation with him, I get a private message from another Trek staffer who was like, "Oh no." And I'm like, "I know, it's weird, right?" And she was like, "Oh, I mean, he's reaching out to like everybody this week for some reason."
Oh.
I'm like, "Oh, really? He's just like trying to talk to a bunch of people or something?" And she said, "Yeah, the amazing thing was that he didn't ask for anything when he talked to me. And he usually does. So that was pleasant, but apparently you're on his radar right now." And I got a message from an exec at CBS that said like, "Well, you testified against Vic. He doesn't like Vic. So obviously he's going to find you." I'm like, "Yeah, well, prefer he didn't," but that's how it worked out. So in the chat, I was like, "Dude, do you think that we don't talk to each other? Like, do you think that like you can literally reach out to a bunch of us in a very short amount of time, and that we won't talk to each other because we talk to each other every day? We know what you're doing, and it's weird. Stop it. It's uncomfortable. Like, just don't do this thing." And then he blocked me. So
that's the go-to response.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it was crazy. And then I found like this entire community of people who donated to Axanar and were unbelievably frustrated and mad because, they haven't gotten to see Axanar yet. And I understand that. That's fine. I don't actually have any commentary on Axanar as far as their production quality or their ability to do things or anything like that. I think that talented people exist all over the place and can make stuff all the time. It wouldn't surprise me if Axanar was unbelievably awesome. Like, it could be. I don't know. I actually don't really care that much, but whatever. But it's weird to see these people. And then I'm like, since then, I've just been asking like normal, standard production questions. And everyone's like, "Oh yeah, Alec has said something about that." And like every time that this happens, like what Alec has said is nonsense. Like, I think he did something where it's like, "Why is it taking so long?" And one of the things that he kind of glossed over in this video was that we had to move studios, and then we had to move studios again. And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, well, he started in LA and then he moved out to Georgia." So then I'm like, wait a minute. Is Ares Studios, the studio that makes Axanar, just a piece of his luggage? Like, does it just go wherever he is? If he decides to move to another place, will Ares Studios be in that place now? And like, are the people that spent like a bunch of money on this project, like, I don't think there was something in the fine print, like, in case the guy in charge moves around a lot, you might not see anything for numerous years. Like,
Yeah, I think somewhere along the line, Alec missed the part about making the film. He saw a couple of people had a successful studio model in Vic, in James Corley, and also the Neutral Zone Studios as well down in Arkansas. And I guess he wanted a slice of that pie. The only thing was he didn't have a bunch of people together with him. He had the one project and that was it. And I think that's been the whole thing all along, is that it's been the one project all along that he hasn't been able to do. If he was someone like Vance Major Owen, who's a big fan film player, releasing tons of shorts, there's a few other people as well that are releasing a lot of content each year in the Star Trek fan film space. But sure, you've got Alec that's just making Axanar, and he can't even do that. But he keeps holding on to the studio as this linchpin as to why he can't make the show, make the film or whatever it is that he's trying to do. And I think the other thing as well is that it's his naivety as well to think, as you say, he's reaching out to a whole bunch of people through a week that everyone talks to each other, and CBS is across what goes on online, whether they interact with it, mention it, comment on it, or anything like that. They're aware of what happens. And that's something that I got to know as Trekzone started to build its audience and build its following, that it is there. And to think that you can just get away with sending LinkedIn requests and reaching out to multiple people and trying to get people to work under pen names as well. I mean, I spoke with Dave Galanter a few years ago, noted Trek author, may he rest in peace. But Alec tried to get him to work on Axanar, doing some sort of writing with it. It's so long ago now. He even said, when Dave said, well, I can't do that because I'm under contract with CBS, Alec's response was to come up with a pen name to avoid any legal complication. Do you think that's balls of steel, Emmett, or pure stupidity or naivety even?
I think it is kind of a hallmark of the interaction you have with someone who's a very big fan of something, but really doesn't understand the way the world works. It's not, but the problem is with Alec Peters is that he's met a lot of people. He's worked with a bunch of people. I think one of the big differences in the fan film world is that he was already in Los Angeles. So he had the ability to just go meet people immediately. He could be like, hey, what are you doing? Let's go get pizza or whatever. And then you just go have a meeting with whomever, and that's fine. I mean, I do the exact same thing when I'm in LA. It's like, okay, here are the people I have to meet on this trip. No problem. But I think the issue is that at this point, you would think that he wouldn't be naive about this because he's probably heard it from at least 30 people. Mm. And there's a point where it might have been naive at one point, and now it is metastatized into full-blown willful ignorance. And I think that's the problem.
Well, Emmett, final word. Do you think that he'll ever knuckle down and just make Axanar?
Well, let me tell you something. When I'm in the position of looking at screenplays or buying scripts or looking at pieces that people have written, if it's a novel, if it's a screenplay, if they tell me I've been working on this project for the past 5 years, I know it's garbage. I instantly know that it's garbage because nothing gets better in that much time. It just doesn't. It's not even a case of do I think it'll ever get done? Honestly, it could. I don't think it will. But if it does get made, will it be any good? I'm thinking no. Also, the audience is so small. And because you're strapped for cash, you're giving out rewards, here's a copy of the script and here's an audio version of the movie. It's all right, well then people have already heard that story. Yeah. What's going on? I would have a lot more respect for the Alec Peters situation if he were firing on all cylinders, making a bunch of things, and then working on Axanar in off time. I would have a lot of respect for that. One of the problems they have in the game industry right now is that you look at a company like, Epic Games, right? They have huge intellectual property. They can make whatever they want, and they're fine. And a lot of people come up with these ideas for games where they're like, I want to do this kind of game that's never been done before, and it's obviously a big budget game. And the problem is that most of the gigantic companies out there that make video games, they all started as very, very small companies making very, very small games. That is how you start. Like, no one starts with a big game. Literally no one. Like, no company works out that way. It just doesn't happen. You have to grow into something that large. You can't just have it right away. Unless you have a tremendous amount of experience in the industry on something else, right? Like if you've worked on 20 AAA titles in a major capacity, somebody will give you the money to make your game. But like they don't give it to some guy from Nebraska who has a good idea for a video game. They're not going to drop the $200 million you need to make that game. I think that the problem with Axanar is that it's been too long and it's just too embarrassing at this point. I think there's a real siege mentality as far as the Axanar project is concerned, where for a while they were able to raise a lot of money by telling people that people at CBS didn't like them, or that like CBS hated Axanar, and they built that up so they could generate money. And now we're at a point where, like, you know what? Maybe people aren't against you. Maybe it's just you're not making anything. Maybe that's why people are mad, because they've given you money and they didn't get anything. And I don't know if you can still raise money on that. I think that's just the consequences of their actions and their marketing, I guess.
Exactly right.
I would love it if fan films had just all the time and money to do anything they wanted. Like I saw an incredible Star Trek fan film the other day. I just clicked it because I was bored and it was like 4:00 in the morning. And I watched it and I ran on Twitter. I'm like, everybody watch this. And then I went back to watch it again. Like, it was fantastic. And it was like 20 minutes long. And it was a great moral ambiguity story about General Order Number 1. It was fantastic. I really liked it. It was a moral quandary. It was very, very Star Trek, and I liked it. I don't know why Alec can't be making stuff like that.
Exactly right. Was that Beyond the Sun by chance?
It was. Yeah, I don't know who that guy is. I don't think I've ever talked to him or met him before. But I sent him a message like, if you need any promotion or anything, just let me know.
That is awesome.
Like, I will be happy to promote this anywhere.
Yeah. It was actually made by a good friend of Trekzone, Aaron Vanderclay, who's a Perth filmmaker. So he's recently graduated from film school in the last couple of years. And he actually made 5 Star Trek Enterprise era fan films as well that you should really check out. And he's moving into this Voyager era now with more of that Star Trek focus. He tells me that, that moral quandary, the thinking piece, rather than the action stories. And I think that's sort of missing maybe from fan films as well, is that they sort of go for this action, even though, a lot of these people that watch the fan films say, oh, well, Star Trek's too action orientated these days. It needs to be back to the original. Yet all these fan films, Axanar included, it's all about a war, about big battles, big suspense and action. These moral quandary stories are what really counts.
I think that one of the things that gets missed all the time about Gene Roddenberry is that he knew nobody was going to sit in front of a TV and watch a morality play for 45 minutes without somebody getting punched in the face. Like, violence is shorthand for conflict, and in space, in the Star Trek universe, there is conflict. And it comes from all kinds of different places and for all kinds of different reasons. We have conflict that has like a happy ending, like, the Fesarius. He was just checking out the ship's functionality, and he had a puppet, and he was Clint Howard drinking Tranya. Like, yeah, it had a happy ending, but it was still conflict. So you really have to look back at that stuff, and if you hear people say, like, I want stuff more like the original, or like more like the way it used to be, and it's like, okay, well, TNG was very boring at times. And a lot of people don't like that as much. TNG was very much a soothing cup of tea for people, and that's great. I wasn't a fan of it, but if you really believe in going back to the original stuff, you're trying to replicate a balance between action adventure and a word problem, essentially. Whether that's morality, whether that's religion, whether that's capitalism. These are all things that can be explored in Star Trek, but you're going to have someone punch him in the face. Like, that's that's just good television. You can't get away from that. When you get into the big war stuff, it's like, okay, great, there's a big war. If there's going to be a big war, you have to surround it on that the morality play foundation where the end result of the war matters and the end result of the war tells better stories. And if that is the case, get your war over and out of the way quickly and get to those better stories.
Exactly right. Well, Emmett, I think we need to bring you back. We're out of time today, but we need to bring you back and chat more Star Trek. For now, though, thanks for having the time, taking the time even, to have a Trekzone conversation.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I'll come back anytime you want.
Keep up to date with Twitter. Catch new podcasts daily on YouTube. Plus, we're beaming to your favorite podcast app 5 days a week. Just search for Trekzone and subscribe.